The morning my daughter-in-law told me to pack my things, she was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee from my cups, in a house whose deed has had my name on it for 31 years. She smiled when she said it. Not cruelly. That was almost worse. She smiled the way people smile when they believe they have already won, when they think the outcome is settled and the conversation is a formality. She said, "Eleanor, we just need more space. You understand, don't you?" I looked at her across the table. I said, "Of course." And I meant it, just not the way she thought I did. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 62 years old. I taught high school English for 22 years. I raised one son in this house. I planted every rose bush in the garden, replaced the kitchen floor twice, repainted the exterior 3 times in 31 years, because I believe a house that is cared for stays standing longer than one that is not. My husband Richard died 9 years ago. Heart attack. A Tuesday morning in March, which is the kind of specific detail that stays with you because grief attaches itself to ordinary things. The day of the week, the month, the particular quality of March light coming through the bedroom window. He was 58 years old. We had been married for 31 years. After Richard died, I did 3 things. I took 1 month. I allowed myself 1 month of the kind of grief that does not function, that sits in chairs and forgets to eat, and answers the phone on the 4th ring, if at all. 1 month. Then I got up. I updated my will. I called Patricia, my attorney, who had handled Richard's estate and who I had trusted for 15 years, and I sat in her office, and I made every document current and correct and organized. And I stayed in this house. Not from sentiment exactly, from the understanding that the house was mine, that it was paid for, that it represented 31 years of 2 people building something together, and that the something did not stop being real because one of the people was gone. My son Lucas married Nicole 4 years ago. Nicole is 34 years old. She is a project manager at a marketing firm, and she is very good at her job, which I know because the qualities that make her good at her job are visible in everything she does. She is organized, she is efficient, she identifies obstacles, and she removes them. She speaks in the decisive tone of someone who is accustomed to being listened to and who has learned to frame suggestions as conclusions. I had found these qualities manageable in a daughter-in-law. I found them more complicated when I became the obstacle. It began gradually the way these things always begin. Small comments in the first year of the marriage that I filed under adjustment. 2 people building a shared life, finding their edges, managing the presence of a mother-in-law with the particular diplomacy that situation requires. Nicole suggesting that I call before coming over rather than simply arriving. Nicole mentioning that Lucas needed space to develop his own routines. Nicole observing, during a dinner in their apartment, that the house on Birchwood Lane was very large for one person. I noted all of it. I said nothing. Lucas said less. This was its own kind of information. My son had always been a man who found conflict expensive and who had learned, across the years of his childhood, to manage difficult things through silence rather than through confrontation. I had understood this about him while he was growing up and had worked to give him a model of direct communication that he had absorbed partially and deployed selectively. He communicated directly about things that did not threaten the peace of his primary relationship. About things that did, he went quiet. When Nicole was in the room, Lucas went very quiet. In the 2nd year of the marriage, the comments shifted register. Not dramatically. The shift was subtle enough that I could not point to a single moment and say, "There, that is where it changed." But the suggestions became more specific. The observations became more frequent. Nicole began to mention, with increasing regularity, the square footage of Birchwood Lane relative to their apartment. She began to reference her sister, who lived closer to her parents, and who Nicole described as having a better situation. She began to use the word practical in ways that were never directly attached to anything, but that accumulated, over time, into a direction. The direction was clear. She wanted the house. Not for cruelty. I want to be precise about this. Nicole was not a cruel person. She was a practical one. She looked at a large house occupied by one 62-year-old woman, and she saw inefficiency. She looked at her own young family in a two-bedroom apartment, and she saw need. She performed the subtraction and arrived at a conclusion that seemed, to her, like common sense. What she did not perform was the calculation that involved the deed, the one with my name on it, the one that had been in my name alone since Richard died, and which I had spent 9 years ensuring was connected to every relevant legal protection available. She had never asked about the deed. People who believe they have already won rarely check the details. 3 weeks ago, Nicole came to Birchwood Lane on a Saturday morning while Lucas was at his weekly golf game. She sat at my kitchen table. She accepted the coffee I offered. She smiled the way she always smiled. Organized, efficient, decisive. And she told me it was time for me to find somewhere else to live. I listened to all of it. Nicole had prepared. This I could see from the structure of what she said, the way one point followed another with the particular sequencing of someone who has rehearsed the conversation and anticipated the responses. She had done her homework. She had looked at retirement communities in the area and had printed, I noticed, 2 pages of information that she slid across the table with the practiced gesture of someone presenting a proposal. She said the house was too large for one person. She said Lucas worried about me being alone in such a large property. She said there were wonderful communities designed specifically for women in my situation, active, independent, social. She said the timing made sense given that she and Lucas were planning to start a family and would need more space. She said it would be better for everyone. She said it would be better for me. I looked at the 2 pages of retirement community information. I looked at the coffee cup in my hand. I looked at Nicole across the table with her organized smile and her prepared points and her absolute certainty that this conversation had one possible outcome. I said, quote 2. She said, quote 3. I said, quote 4. She said, quote 5. I nodded. I said I would think about it. She left looking satisfied. The satisfaction of a project manager who has initiated a process and received no significant resistance. The first meeting had gone well. The outcome was, in her assessment, a matter of timeline. That was her assessment. Mine was different. But that was before I made a phone call she didn't know about. One I had made the morning after our conversation, before she had finished her drive home. The following 3 weeks had a quality I recognized from the years of teaching, the quality of time that is moving towards something. Nicole began texting with increasing frequency, updates about the retirement communities, questions about my timeline, a mention that she and Lucas had spoken to a real estate agent just to understand the market, she said. No pressure, just information. Lucas called twice. The calls had the particular texture of conversations that have been prepared in advance by someone else. He said the right things in the right order, but without the spontaneity of his own thinking. He said he worried about me. He said the house was a lot to manage. He said Nicole had found some really nice places that I might like if I kept an open mind. I listened to both calls completely. I said I was thinking about it. I was not thinking about it. I was letting them think I was thinking about it, which is a different thing entirely. The moment that changed the register of everything happened 3 days ago. Lucas and Nicole host a monthly dinner. It began in the first year of their marriage as a genuine gesture, a regular meal with Lucas's mother, Nicole's parents, Frank and Diane, and occasionally a friend or two. I had attended every one. I had brought wine. I had asked appropriate questions about Frank's retirement project and Diane's book club. I had been, by any measure, a cooperative presence at these dinners. 3 days ago, I arrived to find that Nicole's sister and her husband had been added to the table without mention. Also present was a woman I did not recognize, who was introduced as a colleague of Nicole's. 7 people at a table set for 7, which meant the addition had been planned, and my lack of prior knowledge had not been an oversight. I sat down. I noted the configuration. I poured myself a glass of water, and I waited to understand what the evening was for. I understood within 20 minutes. Nicole waited until the main course, until the table was full of food and wine and the particular relaxed conversation of people who have eaten together before and have found their comfortable register. Until Frank was mid-story about something that happened at his former office, and Diane was laughing and Nicole's sister was refilling her glass. Then Nicole said, quote, 6. The table settled. Nicole looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at the table. Nicole said, quote, 7. Frank said, quote, 8. Nicole smiled, the organized smile, the one I had seen across my own kitchen table 3 weeks ago. She said, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 9, underscore, underscore. The table received this with the warm murmur of people who have been given a version of a story that sounds complete and reasonable and settled. Diane said, quote, 10. Frank said, quote, 11. Nicole's sister said, you'll love having family in the neighborhood. I sat with my wine glass and let the warmth of their approval move through the room. Nicole's colleague, the woman I hadn't met, said, and the house will have a family in it again. That must feel right. I looked around the table. Lucas was still looking at the table. 7 people in a room, 6 of them receiving a story about what I had agreed to. One of them, me, who had agreed to nothing. Nicole had announced my eviction from my own home at a dinner table in front of witnesses. Not cruelly, efficiently, as a fait accompli, a settled matter. A conclusion so obvious that it had already been shared as news. I set my wine glass down. I looked at Nicole. She met my eyes with the calm certainty of someone who has executed a plan successfully. I smiled. I said, what a lovely way to put it. And I let the conversation move on. Because what Nicole did not know, what none of them knew sitting at that table in the warm light of the dining room, was that I had spent the 3 weeks since her visit to my kitchen doing something she had not anticipated. She had come to my house assuming I was a problem to be managed. She had not considered the possibility that I had been managing this problem for 9 years. Long before she arrived at my kitchen table with her 2 pages of retirement community information, long before she decided that practical solutions were hers to arrange. The envelope in my bag that evening was not there by accident. I had brought it deliberately. I had been waiting for the right moment to use it. And Nicole, by making her announcement at a table full of witnesses, had just given me exactly the moment I needed. I waited until dessert. Not from hesitation, from the understanding that timing is everything and that the right moment to place something on a table is when everyone at the table is comfortable enough to be genuinely surprised by what arrives. Frank was talking about a fishing trip. Diane was asking Nicole's colleague about her work. Nicole was refilling Lucas's water with the particular attentiveness of a woman who is managing multiple things simultaneously and doing all of them well. I reached into my bag. I placed the envelope on the table in front of my plate. Not dramatically. I set it down the way you set down a napkin, a small, ordinary gesture that nonetheless produced a small, ordinary silence. The kind that spreads from one end of a table to the other in the time it takes for people to register that something has shifted. Nicole looked at the envelope. She looked at me. I said, I thought this would be a good moment, since we're all here. She said, Eleanor. I said, you shared your news with everyone. I thought I'd share mine. The table was very quiet now. I opened the envelope and I placed 3 documents on the table. Face up. Clearly legible, the way documents are placed when they are meant to be seen rather than hidden. The first was a letter from Patricia, my attorney, dated 10 days ago. It was addressed to me and it outlined, in the precise language of legal correspondence, the confirmed status of the property at Birchwood Lane, the deed, the owner of record, the absence of any co-claimant, any lien, any encumbrance that would complicate the established ownership. My name. Alone. Confirmed. The second document was a registered letter that had been sent, by Patricia's office, at my direction, 9 days ago, to Lucas and Nicole at their apartment address, formally notifying them that any discussion of the Birchwood Lane property, its future use, or its occupancy, was a matter requiring legal consultation and could not be resolved through informal conversation. They had received it 4 days ago. I knew this because Patricia had confirmation of delivery. Lucas looked at the second document. His face did something I had not seen it do in some time. It moved through several expressions quickly, recognition, then the particular expression of a person who understands that a conversation they believed was private had been documented, then something quieter and harder to name. Nicole had gone very still. The organized efficiency, the prepared points, the settled certainty, all of it had stopped. She was reading the first document with the focused attention of someone who has just encountered information that does not fit the structure of what they believe to be true. Frank said, quote, 18. I said, quote, 19. Diane said, quote, 20. I said, quote, 21. I kept my voice exactly level, not cold, precise. Quote 22. The third document was a single page. It was a trust document, established 7 years ago. It outlined the transfer of the Birchwood Lane property, upon my death or voluntary transfer, to a charitable foundation for retired educators in Connecticut. Not to Lucas, not to Nicole, not to any family member, to a foundation. One I had established with Patricia 3 years after Richard died, when I understood that the house's future was something I needed to decide myself rather than leave to circumstances. I had told no one. There had been no reason to tell anyone until there was a reason. Nicole looked up from the documents. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not the organized smile, not the efficient certainty. Something rawer and more unguarded. The expression of a person who has executed a plan with precision and arrived at the finish line to find the finish line somewhere else entirely. She said, "You can't." I said, "The documents are from my attorney. You're welcome to have your own attorney review them." She said, "Lucas." Her voice had changed register. The decisiveness was gone. What replaced it was something that sounded like appeal. "Lucas, did you know about this?" Lucas looked at his plate. He said, "No." One word. But it carried the weight of a man who understood in that moment that there were things about his mother he had not known and things about his situation he had not examined, and that the table he was sitting at was not the table he had believed it was. Frank cleared his throat. Diane looked at her dessert. Nicole's colleague found something on her phone that required attention. I picked up my wine glass. The room had the particular quality of silence that follows the arrival of information that reorganizes everything. Not the silence of a fight, the silence of a reckoning, of people sitting with the gap between what they assumed and what was true. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. I was not performing calm to conceal fury. I was genuinely calm in the way that comes from having prepared for something carefully and having watched the preparation produce its intended result. The anger, if there had been anger, had been used up 9 days ago when I sat in Patricia's office and signed the registered letter. What remained was something cleaner. Clarity. Nicole said quietly, "When did you do this?" I said, "The trust was established 7 years ago. The attorney's letter is from 10 days ago. The registered notification was sent 9 days ago." She said, "Before I even—" I said, "Before we spoke, no. The trust predates our conversation by several years. The legal correspondence was in response to it." She was very quiet. I said, "I want to say something clearly, Nicole. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because my home is my home, and the decisions about it are mine to make. You made an announcement tonight about an outcome you had not confirmed with me. In front of my son and your family, and a woman I've never met." I kept my voice even. I thought it was important that everyone have accurate information. She said nothing. Lucas looked up. His eyes met mine for the first time that evening, with the full attention of someone who has been looking at the table and has finally looked up. There was something in his expression that was difficult to read, and that I did not try to read quickly. It was the expression of a man processing several things at once and needing time for the processing. I said, "Lucas." He said, "Mom." I said, "I love you. The house is yours to visit whenever you want. It is not yours to arrange." He nodded, once, slowly. The dinner ended shortly after, not with confrontation, not with raised voices. with the particular quiet deflation of an evening that has arrived at a truth it was not designed to contain. Nicole's colleague left first, with the diplomatic haste of someone who has witnessed something private and is extracting herself with appropriate speed. Frank and Diane followed with careful hugs and the slightly stunned expressions of people who had arrived expecting to celebrate and were leaving having witnessed something else entirely. Nicole collected the dishes without speaking. I helped her. We stood at the kitchen sink together for a few minutes, rinsing plates in silence, and the silence was not hostile. It was simply the silence of two women who had each understood something about the other that they had not understood before. I dried my hands. I picked up my bag. I said, quote, 37. She said, quote, 38. I let myself out of my son's apartment and walked to my car in the evening air and drove home to Birchwood Lane. To my house, the one with my name on the deed, the one that had been mine for 31 years and would remain mine until I decided otherwise. It is a Tuesday morning. I am sitting at the kitchen table on Birchwood Lane with coffee. The garden is visible through the window, the rose bushes I planted, the lavender along the back fence, the particular quality of morning light that comes through this window at this hour in a way I have been watching for 31 years. Lucas called yesterday evening. He said, I didn't know about the trust. I said, I know. He said, I should have said something. When Nicole, I should have said something. I said, yes, you should have. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I'm sorry, Mom. I said, I know that too. We spoke for 40 minutes. Not about the house or the documents or the dinner. About other things. The things a mother and son speak about when they have gotten past the difficult part and arrived at the part that is simply them. He is coming for Sunday dinner. Nicole is not coming for Sunday dinner. That is her choice, and I respect it. There is time. There is always time for people to arrive at understanding when understanding is available to them. I am not in a hurry. I have lived in this house for 31 years. I intend to live in it for considerably longer. Nicole came to my kitchen 3 weeks ago and told me, kindly, efficiently, with 2 pages of printed information, that it was time for me to find somewhere else to be. She forgot one thing. Practical solutions only work when you own the problem. She didn't own this one. I did. I always have. Leave me a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Have you ever had to remind someone what actually belongs to you? Tell me how you handled it. I read every single one.